Hey there guys, so today we're going to be taking a look at how the entirety of the Assassin's Creed franchise runs on this Beelink mini PC. Now this is using a Ryzen 5 5600H and that is a APU, so it does not have a dedicated graphics card. It is just integrated graphics on here. We're going to see if we're actually able to play every single Assassin's Creed game on this tiny little machine, and I think you're going to be surprised by the results. Now starting things off, we have the 2007 classic, the original Assassin's Creed. Now at this point, it is probably one of the most forgotten games within the franchise itself because, of course, being the original one, it actually established a lot of the conventions of the franchise, but of course also being the first outing, it has some distinct differences to it, and while playing through it, it really almost felt alien in comparison to some of the titles in the later part of the franchise, just because of the fact that there's still a lot of aspects of it that are very basic, very rudimentary, and you can tell that there was still a lot of early work being done on how exactly the missions would work and how the whole assassination aspect of everything really comes together. Luckily though, this system is actually able to play the game at pretty incredible levels of performance. We are running the game at the highest in-game graphics settings, and we are getting a more than 100 FPS average most of the time, with our 1% lows never even getting remotely close to dropping below 60. Of course, it is a pretty ancient title at this point, but this does show that you're going to be able to get some pretty fantastic levels of performance, and you're going to be able to get a better visual quality than pretty much any console of this game's time, since back then no console was really playing this game at 1080p. And in fact, a lot of people on PC still had not switched over to these higher resolutions. Of course, there's still a lot of jank to this old title. For example, one of the guards that was just patrolling around kind of just started going around in a circle for some reason, and he just kind of did that for a while until he fixed himself. So pretty hilarious to see, but overall it kind of just shows the age of the title. But because of the age, it actually performs really well on this system. But let's move on to the next game in the franchise, and that of course would be Assassin's Creed 2. Now there are some distinct differences between Assassin's Creed 1 and 2. Specifically, it's the fact that Assassin's Creed 1 actually ran on DirectX 10, while Assassin's Creed 2 runs on DirectX 9. So there was actually an API regression there, and it was one that would remain with the franchise for a lot longer than you probably would have expected, really. Now, Assassin's Creed 2 also introduces something that did not end up becoming a staple in the franchise, but really is a bit of an annoyance, and it is the fact that there is a permanent 60 FPS cap. Now, luckily, we are able to play the game at the highest graphic settings and pretty much say consistently above 60. Our 1% lows only go slightly below that, which means that you're getting the full visual quality out of the game at 1080p. Of course, the only thing we leave out is any form of anti-aliasing. Personally, I always turn off FXAA. I think that a lot of the times it just looks worse than running the game at the full unfiltered resolution, but that's a personal preference thing. In general, the game is going to perform really well for you. But of course, Assassin's Creed 2 was around the time that Ubisoft started to essentially release sequels of sequels, and that would be a mainstay in the rest of the franchise for a good while. With the release of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, we pretty much got a continuation of the story going on in Assassin's Creed 2. Now, in terms of how it ends up performing, we do get a unlocked FPS, but we're still on DirectX 9. But overall, our performance at the highest graphics setting is very consistent. You're going to get a pretty fantastic experience, especially since now our frame rate is uncapped. So if we're on a high refresh rate display, we can actually start to utilize that. And again, we're just on a mini PC with no graphics card, so you're already getting a better experience than the people that originally played this game when it first came out, because again, the consoles back then were not playing this game at 1080p, and you definitely were not running it at the maximum graphics settings. So this in and of itself really feels like a remaster if you remember playing this on a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360. And this great performance carries over to Assassin's Assassin's Creed Revelations, where again you can play the game at the maximum graphics settings at 1080p and get a consistent above 60 FPS gaming experience. You are going to be able to pretty much utilize a high refresh rate display and get the full experience out of this at the full 1080p resolution, which is again an improvement over the result that anyone would have gotten on a console when this game was out. I remember specifically getting this game on the Xbox 360 for Christmas, and this just looks visually significantly better than what it did back then, because back then you kind of just got used to all games kind of having like this blurriness to it, and it's all because it was never running at native resolution of your TV. You could have a 1080p display, but that doesn't mean that the games were being rendered at that resolution. A lot of the times they were just being rendered at around 540p. Now if we take a look at Assassin's Creed 3, and this is the original Assassin's Creed 3, not the remaster that ended up replacing it. Pretty much the only way to play the original version on PC now is if you've already owned it before, or if you can get a key for the original game, but it is no longer available for you to buy. Now luckily I do have access to this copy since they've given away the game for free before, and overall this is finally when we're starting to see a impact in performance from playing at the highest graphics settings. Now we're still getting a above 30 FPS gaming experience, but this time around it's more in the 40 range. You'll never really go below 30 FPS, so you're still getting a overall better experience than anyone that played this on the original consoles, because the game is still running above 30 and it's not experiencing frequent dips into the 20s, and you are running at the highest graphics settings at the full 1080p resolution. And if you're willing to drop some graphics settings, and I recommend you just go down that route, you can get the performance to go up to 60 FPS and above. But really, this is at the best possible quality settings, and we're getting really nice performance out of this. And again, we are running all of this on a system without a graphics card. Now, Assassin's Creed 4 starts the trend set by Assassin's Creed 3, where we're more around a 30 FPS experience rather than getting a full 60. And this time around, we're not at the highest graphics settings. We have some things set to medium and some things set to high. But for the most part, we are able to get a above 30 FPS gaming experience most of the time, and especially when you're out in the ocean, you get a far more consistent experience. So in general, a really nice experience here. And this was also the first time that we finally moved away from DirectX 9 to DirectX 11. Now, Assassin's Creed 4 pretty much ended up actually getting a standalone sequel expansion called Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. And it just builds upon a lot of the already existing gameplay, and really the level of performance that you get is pretty much identical, with again the open ocean experience being the most consistent. But in general, the level of performance on land is exactly the same as Assassin's Creed 4, as you would expect, since it's pretty much the exact same game. But not really much for me to complain about on this one, because you're still going to get a really enjoyable experience. You can play around with the graphics settings, and if you really want to hit that 60. But Assassin's Creed 4 is such a fantastic game that just the more content for it, the better. So all in all, an absolute win here. Now they also did a standalone game for Assassin's Creed 3 called Assassin's Creed Liberation, and it did end up getting a HD update at some point. That's what you're seeing here. The level of performance that we get out of this is absolutely fantastic, with the game pretty much consistently giving you a 60 FPS gaming experience with very few dips here and there. This is all at the maximum graphics setting. So in general, it is a really nice experience, and visually speaking, it does look really great. All in all, an absolute win there. Of course, Assassin's Creed 4 got another version of it essentially released, which is Assassin's Creed Rogue. Now, this released at the exact same time as Assassin's Creed Unity, but was built off of what remained of Assassin's Creed 4 before they switched over to an updated engine for the next generation of consoles at the time, which were the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. So this was essentially the legacy version that was designed to come out for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. Which at the time had a massive installed user base in comparison to any next generation of consoles. So it was essentially Assassin's Creed 4's last hurrah, and I would say that it was definitely a well worth experience. Personally, it is one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games for shaking up the story a bit by actually letting you play as a Templar instead of just the assassins. It gives you more of the fantastic gameplay that they established with Assassin's Creed 4. The one key aspect is to be able to get a consistent 60 FPS experience. You do have to sacrifice a lot more in terms of the graphics settings, but the game also this time around defaulted to some more conservative performance settings that I kind of just let roll with it because it gave a consistent 60 FPS gaming experience for the most part. You would only really ever see drops in transitions, so nothing that really affected the gameplay, and in general it felt incredible to play. I had an absolute blast that I really didn't think about turning up any graphic settings or anything like that, because personally I don't really think that the game needed it. But of course, the next gen release of Assassin's Creed for that same year is a completely different story when it comes to performance. The full 1080p resolution, running around the city, doing anything in crowded areas really drags down the performance. We're struggling to even keep a above 30 FPS gaming experience, with most of the time it just being below that, and our 1% lows do dip pretty low. Now you can resolve a lot of these performance issues by just dropping the resolution, but specifically Assassin's Creed Unity really wants you to drop things down low, down all the way to 720p to really give you a consistent experience. So this could already start to spell disaster for the rest of the franchise if we're already starting to struggle with Assassin's Creed Unity here. It took dropping things down to 720p to really at least get the experience to be consistently above 30 and actually feel smooth even in the most intense areas. And by going down to 720p, we do actually get a far smoother experience, and it does feel really nice to play like this. But once you start to go into really crowded areas, the performance numbers can tend to drop, but at least like this, it'll never drop below 30 and you'll have a good experience. It's just not going to be anything incredible, and you are sacrificing a lot visually here. So Assassin's Creed Unity is already really starting to show a shift in the franchise in terms of just how demanding it can actually be. Interestingly enough, Assassin's Creed Syndicate actually ended up performing better than I was expecting it to. At the lowest in-game graphics settings, we are able to actually keep a consistent above 30 FPS average for pretty much all of the time. Very rarely would it actually end up dropping below that. And in general, it felt a lot better than Assassin's Creed Unity to play, which is surprising to see. In general, it was actually a very pleasant experience. Of course, if you would like to boost the overall performance, you can actually lower the render resolution, but it's not really that necessary. I think I found the game to be perfectly playable like this and actually really enjoyable. It's one of the Assassin's Creed games that I enjoy the most, specifically because I just love the aesthetic of it. It would be nice to actually be able to play it at the highest graphics settings, or at least higher settings than the lowest, but the fact that we're actually able to get decent levels of performance out of this is really impressive out of a system that again does not have a graphics card. Of course, things start to get very difficult past this point. Thankfully, Ubisoft actually started to include a built-in benchmark into the Assassin's Creed games at this point, which is a welcome addition because it really lets you find out and fine-tune the overall performance within the game. And in general, with the lowest in-game graphics settings at the full 1080p resolution, you're looking at about a 30 FPS gaming experience, and expect some pretty frequent dips below that. In general, it's not really something amazing to experience, but the game itself is actually still pretty playable. What I would recommend that you do is you just open up the settings and drop the render resolution percentage down to around 80. Doing that really helps to boost the overall experience and keep those 1% lows consistently above 30, which means that the experience is going to feel as smooth as possible on this specific system. Now, this is another scenario where we do have to turn down the graphics settings to the lowest possible, but visually speaking, the game still looks really nice, and you can actually afford to turn up the textures a bit. I just specifically went with what the lowest preset would go with, and just raising the textures a bit is going to overall help to improve the image, and you don't need a lot of those extra effects that will really drag down the performance. Now, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is actually a very similar experience where if we run this at the full 1080p resolution, we're looking at a really rough 30 FPS average, with very frequent dips below that. And in general, you're going to have a pretty inconsistent experience, but it is going to be doable like this if you just really want that full 1080p resolution. But very similar to what I said with Assassin's Creed Origins, dropping the target render resolution down to 80% really boosts your overall performance. And now you won't really have to worry about any major dips below 30. And if you want to get things to be as smooth as possible, as consistent as possible, you can set a 30 FPS game cap. And doing so will mean that you will never ever have any FPS fluctuation whatsoever. And that could actually feel better for you than having any fluctuation down from 30 all the way up to 40, sometimes going up to 45 or even 50 depending on the specific location that you're in. So if that inconsistency is annoying to you, a locked 30 FPS cap will handle that perfectly fine. But the game is actually playable like this. And now we're on the most modern one to date, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now this does see the franchise finally transition over to DirectX 12, and it does also introduce FSR. And this is running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and FSR set to performance mode. So what we're looking at here is around a 30 FPS average for most of the time here. It's actually pretty decently playable, which was surprising. And in general, what I'm just finding is that I'm really impressed that this little Beelink mini PC is pretty much able to play the entirety of the Assassin's Creed franchise at a reasonable level for the most part. You know, we're not talking about chugging along through 20 FPS or anything like that. We're talking about being able to consistently hit an above 30 FPS average without really having to sacrifice too much to actually get there. Overall, I'm really impressed with this mini PC. The 5600H is actually a really capable chip because without a graphics card, we were able to get some incredible results out of a franchise that is one of the most popular in the world in gaming. Now, of course, there is the cheaper, lower end 5560 version. Keep in mind though that you are going to get noticeably lower gaming performance, but it is far more efficient and a lot quieter. And if you're looking to only play older titles, it is a nice alternative. I'll leave down below a link to both of these, and you can see some of my videos comparing the two to see what the performance difference is like, but you will actually be able to get some really rock solid gamer performance, especially on older titles with both of these. It's just that the 5600H is on a whole nother level of impressive. So check them both out down below. At their price range, you're really not going to find a mini PC or even a laptop that has comparable levels of performance. But anyways, I will catch you guys next time.